And what you'll find is maybe what's the names on the call already?
Yeah.
Marking.
So we've got one attendee. Morning, and thank you to the attendees who've joined so far. We're just going to wait another couple of minutes for some people to attend, and then we'll get started. Thank you for waiting.
So good morning, everybody. Just wanted to give you a good introduction about the session of today. As you know, I'm Margarita. I'm here with Chris Martin from SHL and Gavin Donaldson from SHL. And we are hoping that through this new system, we can connect and ensure that the session happens in the best way as possible. I just wanted to double check if everybody can hear me. If you could let me know they are muted or unmuted.
They're muted at the moment.
They are muted at the moment. So could you send a quick test message to check if you are hearing me well? Luke? Yes, okay, perfect. You can hear me. Right.
We're actually getting more people joining.
More people joining, so everybody can see the slides in the computer. Great. Yes, excellent, fabulous, super. Okay, great. So are we recording the session?
I believe so.
Before we start? So we are trying this new system, so hopefully the session is being recorded. Perfect. Okay. So, well, we are ready. So I'm really happy to be today at last with my SHL friends to talk about different assessment tools that SHL offer for us. SHL has been working with us for just a second. So can you take...
So good morning, everyone. It's Gavin from SHL. And I just wanted to do a quick introduction for myself and my colleague Chris. So Chris is your account manager, and he manages the kind of day-to-day interactions with you as a client. And my name's Gavin, and I support Chris in delivering solutions to Vodafone. And the purpose of today's call, really, and today's webinar, is to take you through some of the products and services that we offer Vodafone already and that your colleagues are using across the organization, but also to share a little bit of our ethos and what we do as a business with you as well. And so as I move through today's webinar, I'll run through the slide deck and try and give you some good examples of how we're supporting Vodafone at the minute, so you can see what your colleagues are doing, but also what you have available to you. And so when we look at today's content, we'll cover a broad range of subjects from our services, but also training that's available to you, and also some of the case studies of how we're using our services in other businesses. Before I begin, I just wanted to do a quick introduction about who SHL are and who our company is. So really, we're a global company that works in the talent assessment space. And the way that I like to think about our business is that any aspect of the people strategy can be touched upon by us as a business. And because we're global, we can be local to you, have consultants near you that can support you through many of the endeavors that you have in the HR space. And so, you know, that could be from a single assessment right up to the audit of an entire department. But we can support you across the globe, and that means that we have our services in multiple language, so that you don't have to work in business English. You can actually work in your native language, and that really makes our services feel much more attractive to candidates. When we look at the services more broadly that SHL offers, we cover essentially three big blocks: define, measure, and realize. And in the define space, this is about the talent architecture, things like competency frameworks. And you'll see later on the webinar that actually your frameworks have been mapped to our assessment models. And so therefore, you can have our reports outputted in exactly your language, the language that you use day to day as a business. When we look in the measure section, this is where some of our prowess in terms of our products and services really comes to light. Here, we can help you select the right candidates, develop the right capabilities, but also, we can provide you with interview questions or development points, which help you to be really specific in what it is that you're trying to achieve. Finally, the realize section. Here it's about having the right people in the right place with the right capabilities at the right time. You'll see alongside our big services on the left-hand side that we also offer training in our services as well. And this comes in 3 blocks. This is training in how to use our platform, so that feels intuitive and user-friendly. Anything from setting up an individual assessment through to running whole campaigns. And then we also provide specialist training in psychometrics. And some of you may have come across this in the past, but this training helps users to really get the most out of our products and services. And so here what you'll find is that you can request or send a request into Chris if you'd like to know more about how you can be trained in the use of our services. So just to give you a broad overview of the session today, what I'd really like to do is, first of all, work through the business case for using some of our assessments. And this is something that we're particularly important to us at SHL, is actually having a real world impact on your business so that we can demonstrate outcomes for you, such that our products and services aren't nice to have, but actually we can demonstrate a real ROI on using them. Then I want to run you through an overview of the range of personality and ability assessments that we have. And so here I'll be talking about some of the assessment services, the personality assessments that we can offer you, but also some of the other services that we have available. Then I'd like to show you a few examples so that you can see some examples of how the reports can be outputted in Vodafone language. And this should be quite an interesting section, as we've mapped many of the roles within Vodafone to our services, such that you can just plan to do an assessment for a specific role. And then I'd like to just talk a little bit about how we can then incorporate these services into our selection decisions. So the session today will cover a broad range, as you can see on the slides. Before we get started though, and I can already see some of the chat boxes flashing, what I'd like to do is encourage you to open up an email and put in the email addresses for Chris and myself. And you can see these on screen now. That's chris.martin@shl.com and my email address, which is gavin.donaldson@shl.com. And if you can title the email webinar questions, what you can do, because we have a number of attendees on the call today, is collect your questions as we go through and then fire those over to Chris and myself so that we can give you a more detailed response than potentially we can on the webinar today. So I'll just leave this slide up for a few more seconds whilst you note down those email addresses. Okay, and I've just had a message from Chris saying, thank you for joining to all the people on the webinar. He's not actually going to be doing any of the talking today, but he said he recognized some of the names and he'll be reaching out to each of you following on from today's webinar so that you can send him emails. So yeah, if you've met Chris in a previous life, then please do reach out and say hello. He'd be really pleased to hear from you. Okay, great. So usually at this stage we would do an introduction, but given the number of people on the call today, what we'll do is we'll move on from this However, I do want to just pull out from this slide that if you're currently experiencing any challenges that you think that we might be able to help with, or if you have any key questions, please do email us. We're always here and we're always delighted to hear from you. And so anything that you think we could help with, just detail it in an email and we'll get back to you shortly after today's webinar. So where I wanted to start today is a bit of the ethos that SHL has around its assessments. And really this is a bit different from some of the other assessment providers in that we tend to start with the end in mind. And what I mean by that is that when we think about our processes or our solutions, they start with what is the real business case for using them. So one of the questions that you will get used to being asked if you're working with SHL account managers or consultants is, what are we trying to achieve and what would we like the outcome to be? We start with this understanding of context so that we know exactly and specifically what it is that we're trying to measure, which you'll see is the last step. Once we have an understanding of the context, we can then start to identify what the outcomes would be. Where do we want to get to? And what does that journey look like? Before we actually move on to the actual design of the solution. Now we have some of these pre-prepared against specific job roles in Vodafone, which I'll show you later on. But the important thing here is that measuring impact is always something that's key for us. We like to know that we're having a positive impact on the business. To overlay this in a bit more detail, you can see how some of the talent architecture sits in that initial space. So how your competencies align to your people strategy. These are all important aspects for us to consider before we get into the design of the actual solution itself. What we like to have is a really keen understanding of the specific solutions. So Chris and myself know Vodafone well as a business, and we know a lot about your architecture. But when it comes to potentially more specific problems or specific challenges that you face, sometimes we like to go over these again and make sure that we know that we're working from the same assumption base. So when we move into solution design, this can be anything from selecting a single candidate through to audits of larger populations. And that allows us to collect some of the information around your talent intelligence, and this can help us with succession planning and some of the bigger endeavors that you're no doubt facing within your departments. The final aspect, as you see, and is common to all of our consultancy endeavors, is actually the measurement of impact. So what is going to happen as a result of us working with you? And that's something that we're really passionate about as an organization. So the business case. Usually at this point, we'd have a group reflection to say what people would hope to achieve by using psychometric assessments. But I'll end the suspense and just put up a few of the things that we would put into this list. So I think candidate experience always ranks top for us. It's really important that people engaging with your business have a really positive time when they go through any form of assessment. And this can be for people that are internal and working on development, or it can be for people that are coming in a selection context. But candidate experience is critical to what we try and offer to you as a client. The interesting thing here is that some of the research that's being done by LinkedIn surveys, etc., is rating candidate experience as having a really big impact on how people perceive your brand. And so lots of our services are conceived with the best possible candidate experience in mind. And you'll see later on that we're moving assessment services onto mobile devices so that people can complete an ability test or a verbal reasoning test anywhere in the world at any time, provided they have a phone and an internet connection. But also you'll see down the list that there are some really important aspects that underpin the use of, or the business case for using assessments to make things fair and defensible, so that we know that we're being consistent in our decisions. As I said, to be consistent with your values and your brand. So our services are mapped to your competencies to allow you to have an exact representation of a person against what's important to you as an organization, but also so that we can benchmark your talent against the external industry. So say we were to take a snapshot of a larger team, we could then compare that to your competitors in the marketplace, and this would allow us to see what your bench strength is like, something that's invaluable to succession planning and moving people through the organization. If we get all those things correct, which we invariably do, we should see a rise in all three aspects you can see represented on the triangle. Business satisfaction should go up. So this is our hiring manager's satisfaction in what we're delivering. The impact, the business impact, should be stronger than it was before, and we should be able to see an impact on some of the key metrics. The Zen spot at the top of this triangle is where we actually collect enough information to validate a link between our assessment scores and some of your business outcomes. And this is something that we're really, really passionate about, because we would love to show you some of the data that we can provide that underpins performance in your organization. So here we have the three critical aspects that really underpin much of what I've said already about demonstrating business outcomes. And if you've got any questions on this section, please do feel free to fire those over in an email. So then moving on to assessments in a bit more detail, and really looking at the three arrows here, we're looking at the define stage and using competencies in the assessment. Now, really, the competencies underpin everything that in the assessment space, because we need to know what it is that we're looking for and have really defined that quite clearly before we begin the measurement phase. And so having a competency framework underpinning your assessments is a must. It's not a nice to have. You need to be really specific about what it is you're trying to measure. And this again maps back to demonstrating the outcomes. Once we've got and defined what it is that we're trying to measure, we can then actually tether our assessments to it so that we know what tools measure which competencies. I've put up on the slides here a quick definition of what a competency is, just for a recap. But really, when we're looking at competencies, we're looking at collections of behaviors. And so when we try to access these accurately, we have a broad range and suite of tools that allow us to do it. And the OPQ 32, our flagship personality assessment, was really a world first in that it's conceived with the workplace in mind first. It's designed to be used in occupational settings, and it covers all the criteria that are relevant to the workplace. Now, this is a really exciting bit of the work that Chris and myself have been doing with you. And here we can see, and just a few examples up on the slides, that actually many of the roles within the organization have already been mapped to a suite of assessments. So if you're making an appointment, or if you're looking to develop capabilities, we have the assessments already pre-decided, such that you could say, I want an E-band enterprise sales person, and we would know specifically which assessments would be suitable for that position. If you'd like to know more about this or have any questions around this, then please do get in contact with Chris or myself, because this is a real time saver for you guys as test users, but also it allows you to quickly and easily set up campaigns to assess for members of staff where you might be trying to fill a gap quickly. This is underpinned by our own competency framework. The UCF, or Universal Competency Framework, really is an industry first. It's a competency framework which covers many of the, or all of the occupational roles. So we've gone out and we've looked at all of the competency frameworks that are in existence within our clients, which is thousands. We've also combined that with research into what's important in the workplace. And we've done and created this model to allow us to effectively assess accurately for any given position. So you can see the broad range of competencies here. Now, not all competencies are relevant to all roles. And if you were to be assessed against all of these competencies all of the time, that would be fairly daunting. So what we do is we select the ones that are essential for success in the role. And you can see that the example I've put up on the board here quickly on the slides here for the IT role, you get critical competencies, and then we also decide what are the desirable competencies. Now, the reason for doing this, and the reason we distinguish between critical and desirable is so that we can really differentiate for you the good versus the great candidates. And that allows us to select the most impactful people for your roles, the most highest performing people for your roles, and the ones that are really going to hit the ground running. But also it allows you, when you're looking at two good candidates, to really know what differentiates them. And therefore you can choose the one that best fits the team dynamic at the time, or what it is that you're looking to drive your local strategy forward. So the next thing that I'd like to talk about is the range of assessments that's available to you for actually assessing these competencies. And we have an exciting range of assessments to cover. When we look at them in a general view, before we get into the actual specific products themselves, we have assessments of potential. And in here, we'd be looking at things like motivation, personality traits, but also aptitudes. So these are some of the skills that are critical to success and are seen to be really good predictors of job performance. We can also include values in here also, and we have assessments which include a values framework. The assessments of performance, some of these, like performance metrics and track records, these are very much within your control. So these are the things that you may have access to already. But we're always interested to hear what these are and the level of detail that you have around these, because they can help us sometimes show how our assessments are predicting performance. We also have assessments of behaviours, and in here we can help you provide rigorous interviews, and we have products such as Interview Guide Builder, which creates interview questions for you to ask, so you don't even have to come up with interview questions. They're tethered to the competencies. We also have job simulations and situational judgment tests, and these are a new generation of assessments which help us to give you a really accurate fit of people to the role. SJTs, or situational judgment tests, present people with the types of situations they're likely to encounter in the workplace and ask them to choose from a range of options. Now, some of those options will be acceptable within Vodafone and some of them won't. But importantly, all of the answer options are ones that could plausibly be given in response to the situation they've been presented with. Now, this is important because it gives us quite a fine differentiation of who is suitable to work within the organisation and those that might not fit so well. Finally, there are skills and knowledge tests. For example, these may be anything from the use of the Microsoft Office suite right up to Java programming or any of the other more specific skills assessments that we have. There are hundreds of these on catalogue, and so if there's anything that you think may be of interest, if you email Chris or myself, we'll be able to give you a rundown of the skills assessments that we have available. But they're often overlooked and really, really useful to selection processes, so it's worth mentioning them here. Just a few examples now on the slides to show you the range of assessments that we have available. And like I said, the skills assessments are towards the right-hand side, things like the Microsoft Excel suite or Word, but we also have ones around software programming and a range of other ones which can be really useful for more specific skills. From the left-hand side, we can see that we have our flagship personality assessment, and that gives us a lot about somebody's style and approach to work. It can be linked to behavioural competencies, or indeed has been linked to the Vodafone competencies. It's applicable for all organisational levels because it gives a measure of somebody's competencies, not capability. Aptitude tests in the blue box on the left-hand side are things like logical reasoning, numerical or verbal reasoning, and assessments that you may well have come across in the past and probably at the time felt were quite challenging to complete because the timescales are usually tight and the questions are fairly challenging. Situational judgment tests, as I described on the previous slide, come in a suite as well. So these can be used to look at somebody's fit to the role. And I've placed motivation in a separate box here because motivation looks at the factors that are really important to provide somebody with so that they can excel or perform at their best. And this can be a really useful insight for line managers to determine the different ways in which their employees need to be treated. So it can be a real insight into how they need to flex their leadership style to get the most out of their employees. Now, these aren't discrete in their usage. So what you can do is combine personality assessments with aptitude tests and, say, motivation to provide a really well-rounded view of an employee's skills, strengths, and potentially their development areas if we're using the assessments in a development context. So I thought it'd be really useful just to give you a run through and show you some examples of the aptitude and skills tests. The way to think about the difference between aptitude and skill is aptitude gives us a measure of potential, i.e. what can the person do in the future potentially, whereas skills tests give us a measure of what they've learned already. So they're slightly different. One looks to the future and one looks at the here and now. What these do is they give us really strong estimates of somebody's performance in role. And so when we look at the assessments, if numerical reasoning is important to the role, for example, a finance role, it will give us a strong indication of their potential because it tells us how easily and how readily they can deal with numerical complexity. Similarly, verbal reasoning is a skill that most of us exercise on a daily basis, and that's reading information and arriving at conclusions. We can now give an estimate of general ability because we have a new product called G+, which measures 3 aspects of intelligence to allow us to predict somebody's level of general intelligence. We can also offer the following test that you can see on screen now in a broad number of languages. So we can have these in French or German or English, and English comes in US and UK, but we can also offer languages from across the globe. And here you can see the general ability screen, which is on the right hand side. That includes the top 3 elements from the panel on the left hand side to make one general ability measure. And it's a really useful screening tool for just setting a standard or consistent base level of intelligence for people entering into roles. What's really exciting is that these assessments can be completed on a mobile phone. And like I said, so long as the person has an internet connection and has their mobile device with them, they can now complete the assessments on their mobile. This is a really intuitive user interface, and it allows people to use gestures that are now common on a mobile phone, such as drop and drag and sliding bars, for them to be able to complete an assessment on the go at any place. Now, we'd always encourage people to do it at a time when they can concentrate, but this gives them the ability to flexibly complete assessments so that you can have a great candidate experience for both those candidates that are approaching the business externally, but also for your internal candidates when you're doing, say, development processes or promotion processes. This can be a really exciting way for people to complete assessments, and it's infinitely flexible. They can do it at any time and any place. We do still have our standard verify range as well. So if the person has access to a computer and they're sat at their terminal at their desk, they can complete it on a computer. And this just allows a slightly bigger user interface, as we all know. But we've got these standard assessment suites there if the person prefers to complete them on an actual computer. I've put an example of a verbal reasoning question up on the screen, and you can see that they get given a bank of information and then they're asked to choose from options in a fairly time-bound way. So these assessments are designed to be challenging and allow the candidates to really demonstrate their potential. The numerical reasoning is similar to this, but the information presented is in numerical nature. And again, this helps us to estimate somebody's analysis skills or interpreting numerical data. So this can be important for budgets, costs, looking at trends across data, or even calculating margins. The inductive reasoning suite is a really intriguing assessment. At its base level, inductive reasoning is somebody's problem-solving skills. Now, you might think that doing it with shapes looks a bit strange, But the reason we have to do this is that we can't do it with words, because then we start to measure verbal reasoning, and we can't do it with problem solving with numbers, because that starts to overlap with numerical reasoning. And generally speaking, everybody has a similar level of comfort with shapes, which is why the problem solving assessment is done using shapes. Now, this is a really fun assessment to complete, but also at its root, because it's measuring problem solving, it ties into some really critical elements of job performance, such as somebody's ability to predict what happens next, to answer questions such as how and why, to strategize. So inductive reasoning is a really key element in lots of roles within organizations, and certainly has its place right up into the very senior assessments that take place, where things are a little bit vague. They are challenging, and they're not always easily predictable. We also offer for our candidates the option to verify their test score. So if a candidate completes a test online, to verify that that was them and that they did complete the test in some good and supportive test conditions, you can bring them in and do a supervised version of the test, which is much shorter, but just helps to confirm that the test score that you're looking at really does represent their potential. And so we may do this as well occasionally when candidates say that they were interrupted during their test. And so we can offer them a second stage verification test so that they can really demonstrate their skills. This is unique to SHL and SHL's testing approach, in that we can offer candidates the opportunity to have a go again without it becoming a challenge, or without it needing a big investment of time. You can simply send a verification test or get them to complete it when they come in for their interview. So moving on for the tests of attainment and potential, we then have our skills tests. And like I said, we have hundreds of skills tests available. So if there's something that's really specific to the roles that you're recruiting for, or your hiring managers are recruiting for, and they want something very specific on the CV, instead of just looking for it on the CV, why not test that capability? And this way we know what level of proficiency the person has. We'll often see on CVs today that people will say they're comfortable with the Microsoft Office suite. But does that mean that they're very advanced with it? Does it mean that they're a basic user or a novice user? And these assessments allow us to really make those differential judgments on candidates based on how well they can interact with the system. We've had experts in these suites create the assessments, and this allows us to then really set a level and say how well that person is performing against some set benchmarks. So the next section of the webinar that I'd like to run you through is how to interpret some of the reports that come out, and also to give you an overview of some of the reports that you have access to before I move on to the personality section. Now, our aptitude tests are really easy to interpret. We have them on a graded system which runs from A to E, and these are similar to school grades in Western education, but allow you to really quickly see whether somebody is performing at the average, or whether they're below or above average, and to what extent they've moved away from the average category. So the tests will all present a grade back to you, and then this allows you to then take that back to the candidate and give them an accurate understanding of how well they've performed on the assessment. Importantly, all of our assessments in aptitude are benchmarked against a large group of others that have taken the assessment. So when we say that somebody is excellent, we really mean it. They've usually been compared of upwards of 30,000 people who've also taken the assessment. And we can compare results against graduates or school leavers. We can also compare them against managers and professionals, or we can compare them against the entire UK working population, the entire international working population, or other benchmark groups that are more appropriate for your usage. But importantly, it's not just a score on a test. This is a benchmarked result. The assessment results look like the ones on the slide now, and you can see they're really easy to interpret but also give you written information so that you can then delve deeper into what that score means for the candidate. The narrative passages really do assist line managers, for example, in understanding exactly what it is that assessment's measuring and what it's contributing to the selection process. The really interesting thing about the ability tests that we offer is that they can be used to screen out when doing larger campaigns. This means that if you have a campaign that could potentially attract hundreds of candidates, you can use these assessments as a first stage screen to sift out those who are unsuitable to continue in the selection process. And this stops the investment of later time and money in candidates that wouldn't succeed in the role, which is really important to organisations. It helps to speed up the decision making, but also means we're providing a consistent standard of candidate to your processes. We also offer a candidate report. So if somebody has interacted with the system, we can then send them the results of how they've done. And this can be sent out quickly and automated to the candidates so that they can see how they've performed. What this does is give them a narrative section underneath their score and also some of the factors that underpin their performance. So they get a really accurate understanding of how well they've performed. Against our skills tests, we give 5 different levels. So they go through from novice, so somebody that really only has a basic understanding. And so if we were looking at, for example, our IT test, or maybe even our Excel test, or any other of the Microsoft Office suites, a novice user would only be able to understand the kind of basic concepts or basic elements of the system. We then move up through the following levels of basic, proficient, advanced, and expert, with our expert users on skills tests effectively demonstrating that they have prowess in that area and that they're very good at what the assessment is trying to measure. So if that, for example, was a Java skills test, their programming would be very complex, but also elegantly written. And that would allow us to differentiate them from the more novice users who may have a more basic understanding of what the skills test is trying to measure. Here's an example of a skills test report, and you can see here that there's actually quite a lot of information given back to you so that you can see how well they've performed. It'll tell you which bits they've done really well, but it'll also tell you some of the elements that they potentially missed in going through the assessment. The next thing I'd like to talk through is just the feedback from using the reports. When we're delivering feedback based on ability reports, we will give you enough information to cover off each of the elements that you can see on screen now. The purpose of the assessment will have been agreed up front, and this maps back to what I said at the beginning about understanding the context of the assessment and what we're trying to achieve. The content of the reports will give you a description of the test, a description of the comparison group, and it will also talk about how well they performed. We also give links so that you can start to probe questions around what happens next and what's important. Importantly, our reports don't use any jargon as well. So they give you information that allows us to be really accurate in delivering feedback to people. Now, when you're using this in a selection context, it's critical to allow candidates to see how well they've performed and exactly how that contributes to the selection process. Within development context or within development activities, it also means that we can be really specific about where they need to focus their effort and attention to improve or push their scores up. But we will give you guides and enough information within the reports to feed back results in a way that's meaningful, provides great information, and helps with the decision-making process for any given role or experience. Now, the next area I'd like to run through, personality assessments, is absolutely fascinating. So personality has been widely researched, and we know it's really important to the workplace. If I was to get you to think about an interaction within the business that's been really good, or a time when you've really enjoyed delivering a result with the people around you, or a time when it's been really challenging, undoubtedly what you'd note down would be personality characteristics rather than ability. It would be things like my colleagues were cooperating with me, we had a fun time, they were really good and open to new ideas, they were resilient in the face of setbacks. And this is why personality assessment is so critical to positions, because it gives us a view of how that person will likely respond, what their default preferences are, and what their match to ours as an organisation is. Personality itself tends to remain relatively stable as well. So once we've taken a snapshot, we can be really confident that we've got an accurate picture of that person in relation to the role. Personality is what underpins competencies, so it's really critical to the workplace. When we look at the studies about how important personality is, when we ask people effectively what differentiates high performers from poor performers, about 70% of the attributes that we uncovered were personality attributes. They weren't saying things like they have a really good understanding of Microsoft Word. They were saying things like they have a really good level of understanding of people. So when we look through the white paper, and this is something that Chris and myself can send to you, it's really important that we focus on personality in the workplace. The OPQ 32, which is our flagship personality assessment, explores 32 different dimensions of personality. So you can see that's a really broad picture of what it is that makes a person them, what personality characteristics are important, and which things they place a really strong emphasis on as a person. If you think about the colleagues around you, you might be able to think of some of the dimensions of personality that really distinguish them from other people. Broadly speaking, each of the 32 dimensions falls into 3 categories: relationships with people, and so that's the bits you're likely to see and observe; thinking style, which is their approach to handling problems or analysis, and some of these things you don't actually see or observe in another person, but it's important to get a gauge of those. And then feelings and emotions include a wide range of aspects such as person's drive, their levels of ambitiousness, but also how resilient they are in the face of setbacks. And so you can see that using 32 different dimensions of personality, we can begin to make a really clear picture of what it is that makes a person important to the business. Now, if somebody completes a personality assessment, they're likely going to want some feedback because it is a bit of an investment in time. They usually take about 15 or 20 minutes to complete. And again, these are benchmarked against other managers and professionals, or we can benchmark against the international population. Again, it's available in over 30 languages, and the comparison groups are extensive. But we also offer an extensive range of reports, and that's really what brings the OPQ to life. I've shown here on the slides an example question which shows one of the ways in which people are challenged to show their preferences, and they're asked to pick between what's most like them and least like them. Sometimes this is a challenging task, but what it does is allows us to really finely hone what it is that makes them distinguished from other people. We have different versions of the OPQ available, which is we have one for general use across all organizations, and this allows us to make comparisons against the general population or an international population. We also have one that's more suitable for working in the customer service and sales arena. And the final version of the assessment includes one that's focused more on manufacturing. Now, this may be more or less relevant to you as a business, but certainly the first 2 versions, the first one being the managerial and professional level, which is applicable to most people within the organization, and the customer service and sales version, these can be used in a wide range of roles to help you select the right person. And we offer a range of comparison groups, which allow us to then make accurate comparisons against relevant groups of others that have completed the assessment. If you'd like more information on the OPQ and personality assessment, then this is something that Chris and I are always delighted to provide more information on. What gets really exciting is that we've created a range of reports for Vodafone specifically against your language and your competencies. I've got a few snapshots of these coming up, and if you'd like more information again, please do email over and we can give you example reports. But we have reports for the Vodafone potential indicator report, and I'll show you a screenshot of this in a second. We have a store manager assessment report. We have a leadership assessment report reported against Vodafone competencies. We also have a critical thinking skills report. And you can see the other ones up on the slide now, such as the sales report and team leader report. The best way to demonstrate this is to show you an example of one of the reports. There's a simple output which shows the level of preference and the level of potential that a candidate has against each of the competencies that make up the model. So you can see below Mr. Test Candidate, I don't think that's his real name, and how their responses against the Vodafone potential model stack up. Here you can see the strengths are gets to the root causes and also strengths of influence. But development areas might be in areas such as ask what if, or maybe even resilient under pressure, or the other areas that have been less strongly rated, such as understands others at the bottom. This allows you as the report user to quickly and accurately hone in on where the strengths and limitations lie. And this can prove invaluable when, for example, creating interview questions, or maybe creating a development guide for an individual, and you want to develop them into a more senior role. The applied thinking report gives a slightly different lens, and this goes back to some of the assessments that I talked about. But here we have somebody's ability to analyze, to adapt and respond to change, to learn, and to maybe create or innovate. And then for each of the main areas, we then have a detailed breakdown into how their preferences stack up. So you can see that this candidate doesn't like dealing with abstract concepts or things that are new, but they also don't like to probe information or look into it to find potential errors. And so they might not be as assessing as other candidates are. And again, this information can be used in a selection or development context to help you make accurate decisions. Alongside this is our suite of standard reports. And so against the 20 competencies that I showed you early on in the webinar, you can actually have a rundown of how they're doing against those 20 competencies overall. This report contains detailed information that allows you to get down to a very specific level of what a person's preferences are and how they will interact in a workplace. So the 20 competencies, as I showed you earlier, include things such as working with people, analyzing, relating and networking, persuading and influencing, leading and supervising, and a range of other really strongly workplace related concepts. When I was going, just up on the slides at the moment is a little bit of the report output in more detail. So you can see here, if you look down deciding initiating action, you can see that the person has indicated that it isn't really a strength of theirs. And so it's given red crosses against much of the elements that go within this report. And this is really the way that we like to report personality. When is somebody saying, yes, that's really like me? And when does somebody say, actually, no, that's not a lot like me? And how does this then relate to the role? Each of our reports has a really simple to use report key, but provides a lot of information that allows you to be very specific in the feedback you give the person, how you focus their development, or the reason for the selection decision you're making. At each stage, it's also benchmarked so that you're making your comparison against thousands of others, so you can be really certain and accurate in your comparison. So usually at this point, we'd have a look at some of the critical competencies for your role and how they might map onto those. But as we've got a few attendees on the call today, we won't go through this activity. But it might be interesting for you to think about what the critical competencies that allow you to perform in your role are, and the last time you've had really clear feedback on those. Chances are that's probably going to be a bit of a difficult question to ask. And this is the real benefit of personality assessment. It gives you timely, easy to understand feedback that's relevant to your role and therefore allows you to plot your development, But also, if you were thinking about finding an ideal replacement for your role, for example, you could focus exactly on what was important and map that out. And that's what our psychologists have spent time doing in making the assessment suites for many of the job descriptions that are already available within Vodafone. So just to run through some of the other OPQ reports available, we have a team impact report. So if you're looking at a team dynamic and wanting to make it stronger, or if you're looking to create a team identity, the team impact report can be really useful. It can also help if there are disconnects in the team or tensions to explore those further and make sure that you have a really well stitched together team. But we also have the motivation questionnaire. And like I said, this sits centrally to all of the other assessments because it tells us what's important to energize a person and how we get the best out of them. If you think about what motivates you, how easy would it be to articulate that and to do it in a way that was clear and easy for others to understand? That's what this questionnaire aims to do. And it has a range of different scales and different factors that allow us to see what is really motivating for an individual. It's available in about 18 languages. It takes about 20 minutes to complete and is really useful to help people understand each other better. So the MQ the motivation questionnaire has a really strong part to play in team working as well. Here on the screen, you can see an example of the motivation report, and you can see what's likely to motivate the person, but where also they're likely to find challenges. And so we can be really specific about the feedback that we're giving others again. Situational judgment tests I've described earlier, but just to do a quick recap on this, it looks at an individual's ability to look at a real world situation, weigh up the options and decide on the most effective way of handling that scenario. And as such, it allows us to use a range of options where we know what the correct option is to really help them and challenge them in terms of which is the most effective decision to take. We can score it like an ability test so that we can set a cutoff for you. And this allows us to provide you with people that are really well aligned to your culture and make the right decisions to real world situations. Graduate simulations are also an exciting new product that we have. And this allows us to assess the competencies that you can see on the left-hand side. These give short videos and allow the candidate to watch those on pretty much any device and then choose from a range of options about what is the most and least effective thing to do. Again, these are scored, and so we know which are the most effective and least effective answers in the background, but they're low cost, cost-effective ways to screen lots of people early on in the process against competencies that are really critical to volume roles. Situational judgment tests have multiple elements within them. They usually take around 25 or up to 40 minutes to complete, depending on their level of complexity. And we can look at a range of competencies with situational judgment tests, such as how they interact with us on a one-to-one basis, their ability to provide recognition. And we've got different scales that we can use for development. When we're using this for selection, what we tend to present is just one overall score, which allows us to sift, much like an ability test. Where I'd like to end today's webinar, though, is to have a quick look at some of the innovations that we've been experiencing in the marketplace. Now, I've talked how SHL is leading the way on some of these innovations with our mobile first, the ability to complete an assessment on a mobile phone anywhere in the world in a language that's relevant for you. But when we look at what the future of assessment means, what underpins a lot of that and a lot of what you see on your screen at the moment is actually the collection and assessment of data. So providing assessments that are really accurate on the front end to candidates, where they have a simulation of what's going on, they can access it through their mobile phone, and that it's timely and quick and easy and mobile optimized. But also what happens for us as a business is we start to collect an awful lot of data very quickly on our candidates. When we think of our workforce now, That allows us to see how we're trending against our key competencies, to see where our development opportunities may lie as a group, but also at an individual level, and also to continue to make accurate, timely decisions about who we select into the organization that are fair, that we can defend, and that we know are correct. An example of this is our multimedia SJTs. Here, candidates are presented with videos of real people doing real things, and then they're asked to choose which are the most acceptable ways forward. It's an exciting way for somebody to complete an assessment. You may have heard the word gamification in the industry at the moment. Gamification assessments at the minute are struggling with reliability, but our multimedia SJT platform has been tested. We know it's consistent, we know it's reliable, and we know that it helps you to make great decisions. And so this allows us to bring forward the same candidate experience as gamified assessments, but with a really rigorous and psychological underpinning. So it's fun to complete, but also we know the decisions you're taking based on the information are accurate and will deliver business outcomes. So at that point, I'd like to wrap up today's webinar. You can obviously send Chris and I an email, but we've also got the opportunity now just to answer a few questions and potentially explore if you have any burning desires. And so what I'll do is I'll mute for 5 minutes. If you'd like to put those into either the questions or the chat, and we'll try to respond to some of those now.
Okay, go.
Hello everybody, it's Chris Martin here. I thought I've been quiet for so long I couldn't help myself but speak. I can see that Lucy, thank you. I think I remember Lucy, we've spoken in the past in various organisations, so it's nice to have a question from yourselves. And thanks for hello again. Yep. So your question, how does the test take into account dyslexia for both verbal and numerical reasoning? Okay, this is a really important question because that's what we have to as test providers is consider the impact that any assessment can have on a candidate. And it's through dialogue with the candidate that we can understand what typical dispensation they were given in the past. Traditionally, the recommendations are to allow candidates upwards of 50%, though I would suggest that 50% is not the standard. The standard dispensation is around 25% more time. But it's only through dialogue with candidates that we can really clearly understand this. And this is where we, and by that I mean SHL and yourselves as the recruiting business partners can understand what those candidates have had. And different organizations will approach this in a different way, but I think it's through dialogue with those candidates that we help and support them. What a test is designed to do is to assess a candidate and give them the best opportunity to show how good they are. It is not to catch a candidate out, and it's understanding that allows us to ensure that we implement an assessment in the correct manner. And I can see another question from you, Lucy, there. So what language should you administer the test if you are an English-speaking organisation, but the mother tongue is different? Very, very important question, this. It is the recommendation of SHL that assessments are passed to candidates in their first and native language rather than their translated language. Our OPQ and reasoning tests are assessments of a competence, for instance, a verbal reasoning competence or a numerical reasoning competence. They are not an assessment of the English language in this instance. So what we would recommend is you allow the candidate to select the language that they feel most comfortable at completing the test in. And this is the default that your system will allow. You give them the option to complete it in a language. If you are then assessing their English capability, you pick a specific English test to test. And actually on the SHL systems, you have over 200 tests, and there are English language tests available to you. So it's making sure we use the right assessment to assess the right competence. Thank you, Lucy. They were really important questions. I was just... Are there? It would be useful if there are any other questions, but in the, I wanted to pick up on a couple of points that that came to my mind while Gavin was giving the presentation. Firstly, is because of the contract and the services and the nature of the services that we're supplying to Vodafone. Dare I say, there's never been a better time for you guys to practice, to check, to understand all of the tests and to have, dare I say it, not wanting to be frivolous, but to have a play. The reason being is there are no additional charges for these assessments, and these costs have been taken on by group. So everybody on this call and everybody across Vodafone Group and the entire organisation that can use these assessments, and there will be no additional charges to Vodafone for using these. So now's a really good time for us to understand from the portfolio of tests what works, what gives real value, and what can help to improve the candidate experience and the candidate outcomes for your line managers and customers internally. So what tests are really going to offer you the best value? Now you can try it out. And I would stress, please, between Margarita and myself, we can help you and guide you. We have created a test matrix that gives you some initial indications and outlines. And please don't suffer in silence, or don't wonder. Let us try and help you and support you in that activity.
Yes, indeed. Yes, exactly. So like Chris was saying, we already paid for these tests. They are available, and after this call, I think will be a good idea to send the matrix again.
Yep.
So basically, it's a very useful Excel file that can tell you what tests are available, what do they measure, and so on. Some of them you can request them through Taleo.
Yep.
And some of them you need to request them directly through SHL. So we will send you the link where you can contact SHL and request the tests. You could do a play, like Chris was mentioning, try some of them and see how they work and use them. With regards graduates, we have a very kind of defined process. So please stick to the process, because Joanna is on the lead there, and try to use the same tool. So we are not encouraging you to change the current process, But we also have all the recruitment process where you can use all the tools available from SHL. We already paid for them, so please use them. I think it would be a good idea to open a bit for comments. Do you have any comments, the people on the call, questions? They are muted. We are trying to unmute you.
Attendees are unmute all attendees, yes.
Yeah, it feels like you are unmuted.
So in the meantime, while you all think of questions, I just picked up on something obviously Margarita mentioned there, and it's probably something that's worth clarifying. Training. One of the options, and all of the options around training are available to you, but I would suggest you think about the training at three levels. If you are looking to use assessments that are outside Taleo, then there's a system that you can access these tests on. I can coordinate and I can arrange system training for you to be able to be shown, or for your colleagues in administration teams to be shown how to use those systems that will allow you to actually administer assessments. The next type of training is what I would call awareness training. So today we've given you an hour to an hour and a half of insight around some of the assessments. One of the things that we're also very happy to provide free of charge as part of the services that we offer is more detailed insight training around how and when to use certain types of assessments. So if you consider personality assessment, one thing is applying and using all, but the other aspect is how do you use that to ensure that you're giving your line manager and your candidate the best experience, and how do you interpret the results? So that intermediate level of training is something that we will offer, and typically takes around, what I would say is it's a morning session or a 3-hour session. We prefer to do it face-to-face in groups, but recognise the geographical disbursement of Vodafone means that in some cases we might do it through a web platform or video platform. So please don't hesitate to reach out. The final level of training is something that obviously we'll talk to you in more detail about, but would be what we would refer to as certified training, and there is a cost to that. So I think perhaps I'm going to park that one for now, because what I want to talk about is what you can do free of charge through us today. I don't know if anyone has got any questions.
Any more questions? Let me see. I can hear you. I think someone is speaking, but we cannot hear her.
I don't know, Lucy, if you're, or Jean, we can see you're trying to talk, but
you're trying to talk, right? So.
Hi guys, can you hear me?
Can we hear them from your laptop?
Oh yes, we can hear you.
Hi, I'm just to say I wasn't trying to say something.
Right, now we hear you.
We
Go
can
on.
hear you.
I was just saying that I wasn't trying to say something. Very convoluted way of saying I don't have any questions.
Anyone else? Question?
I think it's just background noise at my end that's making it sound like I'm trying to ask a question.
But at least we know you're there.
Yeah.
So yeah, create a sort of dialogue.
Great. So actually, they don't have more questions. I don't know, Gavin, if you have anything else to say.
I think from my perspective, the value that these things bring comes from having a go, as Chris says, trying them out, and just seeing the insights that can be driven from the system, because they're really useful. They give you some really detailed information, but sometimes when you've got a question, they just help you to unlock that little bit of information that you need to inform the decision you're going to take or the approach you're going to take, and so they can be really, really useful. And so I just to echo what Chris has said, have a play around with the system, see how you can use them, even if it's a piece of maybe soft development with some people within your team or a campaign, to give them some feedback that's relevant to their roles, just to see what you can do with the system, because I guarantee you'll find it fun.
Great.
And the other point I would make is I recognise that for a lot of you, may not be using the system on a daily basis, or if at all, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. I will follow up today's webinar with an email tomorrow to each and every one of you who's been good enough to join. Within that email, there'll be a test matrix which will detail information on the recommended assessments for certain levels of role. But details on all of the assessments that are available. Now, that in itself can be a challenge because there are over 200 tests on the system. What I would say to you there is, please don't hesitate to go through them and reach out to me, because rather than you having to set up, just phone up or email and I can set up samples for you. I can actually help you and guide you, and we can understand, and you can get access to those tests without having to be a burden on yourselves. I am here to support. I am a free resource for Vodafone, and you can use and abuse me. My commitment to you is if you email me, I will always respond within 24 hours, and I am here for you.
Great. So thank you so much, Chris and Gavin, for making the time today to come here to the offices. I think technology is good. So I'm happy. And then I think that will be it for the call, and I will give you your time back, the time remaining. So thank you so much, and we will be sharing as well all the notes. So thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Okay.